If you think that dreams are just meaningless images created by the mind while we sleep, the biblical tradition and Judaism offer a completely different perspective. For them, the dream is one of the most mysterious and most powerful doors between the physical world and the spiritual world. In the Bible, some of the most decisive moments in history begin with a dream. Jacob sees a ladder connecting earth to heaven. Joseph interprets the destiny of entire empires from nocturnal visions. Solomon receives wisdom in a dream, and Daniel deciphers messages that announce the rise and fall of kingdoms. These are not mere symbolic stories. We are talking about collective destinies revealed while someone was sleeping. And there is something even deeper. Judaism never considered the dream as a mere psychological phenomenon. The Talmud teaches that every dream contains a spark of prophecy, a fraction of the spiritual world that filters through when rational consciousness is switched off. It even states that the dream follows the interpretation. That is, the way you understand it can influence its impact on your life. You don't just dream. You also actively participate in the meaning that the dream acquires. The Kabbalah goes even further. It maintains that during sleep, a part of the soul detaches from the body and ascends to higher planes, where it receives messages, warnings, or teachings. Every night, without realizing it, you embark on a journey outside this world. The difference is that most people don't know how to interpret it, how to prepare for it, or how to protect themselves from what they might encounter there. Therefore, within Judaism, there are prayers, practices, and rituals specifically designed to sweeten negative dreams, correct their energy, and transform their meaning. A dream is not ignored. It is analyzed, reinterpreted, reoriented, or discarded. And the real question is not whether dreams mean something. The real question is, what if some of your dreams were already trying to tell you something, and you still haven't known how to listen? This is Abel Flores speaking, and as always, I am very grateful that you are here studying with us. Stay for the entire class, because we're going to learn how to interpret dreams together. That's exactly what we're going to study today. Now, let us begin by giving a brief summary of the themes addressed in today's Parashah, which is called Vayetzei. So allow me to invite you to step with me into this ancient yet ever-new scene. Imagine that we open Parashat Vayetzei as one opens a window into the intimate life of a patriarch who is fleeing, in love, deceived, blessed, and pursued. Yes, all in a single portion. The Torah has that kind of dramatic talent, almost cinematic. When Jacob leaves Beersheba, he does so carrying more emotional baggage than actual luggage. And there, in the middle of the road, he falls asleep on a stone. Pause for a second. Who sleeps on a stone? And in that harsh moment appears one of the gentlest visions in the Tanakh, the ladder that touches heaven. Sulam mutzav artsa verosho magia hashamayma, a ladder set upon the earth, and its top reach the heavens. Angels ascend and descend as if they were restless messengers. And God promises him three things that will define his destiny: land, offspring, and protection. Jacob awakens in mystical awe and declares, "This place is Bethel." In other words, this is where his spiritual journey begins. But the narrative quickly comes back down to earth. Jacob arrives in Haran and everything shifts in tone. From the celestial to the everyday. From angels to shepherds. From visions to a well. And to Rachel. And of course, in the Tanakh, wells are an ancient dating app. Jacob moves the heavy stone as if to say, "Look, I'm not just a dreamer. I can handle real life too." Laban receives him warmly, which, as we will see, is more strategic than sincere. Then comes the most famous and most debated marital arrangement in the Bible. Jacob serves 7 years for Rachel, years that the text describes as but a few days, because of his love for her. And when the wedding night arrives, well, Laban invents the first soap opera of the ancient Near East. He deceives Jacob and gives him Leah instead. Jacob protests, but Laban responds with a smile that must have irritated even the angels. Here, the older daughter marries first. Jacob agrees to stay another 7 years for Rachel. Love and patience, a dangerous combination. And in the midst of all this arises the most human and at times painful of struggles: the race for motherhood. Leah, unloved, conceives 4 sons in a row: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Each name a sigh of hope. Rachel, desperate, gives her maidservant Bilhah, who gives birth to Dan and Naphtali. Leah counterattacks with Zilpah. Gad and Asher are born. Then Leah conceives again: Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. And finally, God remembers Rachel. and she gives birth to Joseph, whose name means "may God add," because when pain ends, one always asks for a little more light. Professional life is no easier. Jacob wants to return home when Joseph is born, but Laban, an expert manipulator, begs him to stay. They agree that Jacob will receive the speckled and spotted animals, but faithful to his style, Laban tries to sabotage him by removing them from the flock. Jacob responds with intelligence and breeding techniques that many commentators still debate. The result? He prospers like never before. And when one prospers, jealousy appears. Laban's sons murmur, and God intervenes with a clear message: return to your land. Jacob calls Leah and Rachel out to the field, a beautiful, almost conspiratorial detail, and explains everything to them. They support him without hesitation, and so the family flees. Rachel steals the teraphim, those enigmatic household idols, perhaps out of nostalgia, perhaps for protection, perhaps for something deeper. Laban pursues them, but God restrains him in a dream. The encounter is tense, theatrical, almost like a family trial. They search for the idols, and Rachel hides them with a mix of cleverness and daring. In the end, both sides make a covenant. In Hebrew, it is called Galid. In Aramaic, Yegar Sahadutha. 2 languages, 2 memories, 1 shared boundary. It is a bitter but necessary closure. Laban kisses his daughters and grandchildren and leaves, and Jacob, finally free, returns to the land God promised him upon that stone in the night. The Parashah ends with a heavenly wink. Jacob encounters angels once again. He calls the place Mahanaim, 2 camps, as if to say, the visible world and the invisible walk alongside me. And thus, step by step, he prepares to meet Esau again. But that, of course, is another story. Perhaps the deepest lesson of Vayetzei is not the latter, nor the love for Rachel, nor Laban's deceptions. Perhaps it is this: Jacob learns that life promises heaven, but is lived with one's hands in the earth, and that angels go up and down because true spirituality always moves between both worlds. May each of us, on our own path, learn to recognize our Bethel, negotiate with our Labans, love with Jacob's patience, and walk with the certainty that sometimes, without realizing it, we are surrounded by angels. Imagine that someone comes up to you very seriously and says, "Last night I had a dream. I think God spoke to me." What do? Do you hug them, send them to a psychiatrist, or ask them for the angel's number to confirm it? Judaism does not dodge that question. It works through it from the Tanakh, passes through the Talmud, enters into halakha, and reaches all the way to Kabbalah. Today we are going to take the first step. What are dreams in the Hebrew Bible? Let's start with the words. In biblical Hebrew, the basic term is halom, which means dream. It is the simple dream, that nighttime state in which the mind blends images, emotions, and sometimes messages. But there are 2 other important words, marah, mareh, and machazeh. Both mean vision. Marah comes from the root re'eh, to see. Machazeh comes from the root phizeh, to perceive, to contemplate. These are visions, often prophetic in nature, which can also appear at night, on that delicate border between sleep and trance. The text of Numbers 12:6 is key to understanding the whole map. God says there that he speaks to the prophets in a vision, in a mar'ah, or in a dream, in a halom. But to Moses, the text says he speaks mouth to mouth, face to face, without riddles. In other words, the dream is a channel of revelation, yes, but of a lower, more veiled, more symbolic level. What Moses experiences is in another league, another category. So what are dreams for in the Tanakh? If we look at all the accounts, they mainly appear with 2 functions. First, as a means of revelation or low-level prophecy. God speaks in a dream to prophets, and also to key figures in history. It is not always a clear voice with subtitles. Many times, the message comes disguised as a symbol or a metaphor. That is why Joseph and Daniel are not only dreamers, they are interpreters. A dream brings the encrypted material. The interpreter acts as a spiritual translator. And that brings us to the second function, the dream as a literary tool. Many dream narratives are constructed as dramatic scenes. They do not just tell what happened at night. They serve to highlight the wisdom of the one who interprets, to show who truly understands the divine will. With Joseph and Daniel, for example, the text is almost saying, look, these are the ones who can read the language of God on the screen of the human unconscious. Now let us look at some important biblical dreams, because that is where the theory takes form. Let us begin with the patriarchs. Jacob at Bethel. He is fleeing, sleeping outdoors, using a stone as a pillow. And in that moment of vulnerability appears the famous ladder, set on the earth, its top reaching heaven, and angels going up and down. It is a dream of covenant. There God promises him the land of Canaan, a Nongokish, numerous lineage, and protection in exile. It is not just any psychological dream. It marks the destiny of an entire people. Later, Jacob dreams again, this time in connection with the flocks and his work with Laban. In Genesis 31, the dream is linked to a divine message ordering him to return to his land. Here, the dream is tied to concrete decisions, to migrate, to break away from Laban's abuse, to return to the geography of the promise. With Abraham, the situation is slightly different. The text uses the word tardama, a deep sleep, almost an ecstasy. In the covenant between the pieces, in Genesis 15, Abraham enters that kind of sacred stupor. It is not a light afternoon nap. It is a descent into an altered state in which he receives a nocturnal revelation about the future of his descendants. And then there is the king of dreamers, Joseph. First come his youthful dreams in Genesis 37, the sheaves in the field, the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing down to him. They are dreams of supremacy, and of course, his brothers do not take them as something very tender. Later, in Genesis 40, he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Each one sees symbols connected to his occupation, and Joseph reads life and death in them. Finally, in Genesis 41, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, 7 fat cows and 7 thin ones, 7 full ears of grain and 7 scorched ones. There the dream turns into economic policy, 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. A well-interpreted dream saves an empire from disaster. There are other very interesting cases. Laban, for example, receives a divine warning in a dream. Do not speak to Jacob, either good or bad, when he pursues him in Genesis 31:24. It is as if God is saying, be careful, don't cross the line. Balaam, the famous diviner, also has nocturnal encounters. In Numbers 22, God speaks to him and limits his power, showing him that he is not as free as he thinks to curse or to bless. Solomon in Gibeon experiences one of the most beautiful dreams in the Tanakh. In 1 Kings 3, God appears to him in a dream and offers to grant whatever he asks for. And instead of riches or revenge, he asks for wisdom to govern the people. Ironically, many people only remember the judgment of the 2 women and the baby, but it all begins in a dream. And then we reach the imperial world of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar dreams, and his dreams are terrifying, apocalyptic, heavy with symbolism. In the book of Daniel, chapters 2, 4, and 7, those dreams speak of falling kingdoms, beasts, and colossal statues. Daniel appears as the interpreter who knows how to read history inside the nightmare of power. Here the dream is almost a political commentary. God lets the emperor know that his rule is not eternal. Now we come to the delicate point. Are all dreams that speak of God true? The Tanakh's answer is no. From very early on, tension appears between the true prophetic dream and the false dreamer of dreams. In Deuteronomy 13:2-6, it speaks of a prophet, or a dreamer of dreams, who presents a sign or a wonder, and it comes to pass. But afterward, he invites people to idolatry, to follow other gods. The Torah says, even if the sign comes true, do not listen to him. This is a theological bombshell. It teaches us that the fact that something works, that a prediction comes true, does not make the message legitimate. The measure is not the success of the sign, but fidelity to the Torah. The prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 23, goes even further in his critique. He speaks against prophets who rely on their dreams to legitimize messages that God has not given them. They say, I dreamed. But what they are selling is not the word of God, but fantasies, ideology, ego, and personal interests. Jeremiah denounces a religion based on unverified subjective experiences that uses dreams as an excuse to manipulate. So what is the fundamental biblical message about dreams? That yes, a dream can be a divine channel. God can use that nighttime space to speak, to guide, to warn. But the dream, by itself, does not legitimize anything. It is not a spiritual blank check. It must be in harmony with the revealed Torah, with the ethical and theological content already established. In other words, A good Jew may take his dreams seriously, but he does not turn them into his new personal Torah. He may question, interpret, and learn from them, but always under a golden rule. If the dream contradicts what God has already clearly spoken in the Torah, the problem is not with God. It is with our brain, our desire, or our late-night digestion. And that, precisely, will be the great theme when we move from the Tanakh to the Talmud, to Halakha, and to Kabbalah. Not only what dreams are, but what we do with them without losing our mind, or the Torah. At this point, we've reached the halfway mark of this class, so we're taking a short break to let you know that if you're willing to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen, or by clicking the link below in the description of this video. Personally, I, Abel Flores, sincerely thank you for your contribution, because it helps us a lot in continuing to produce all this content, which is free for everyone, and thus giving more people the opportunity to learn about these ancient teachings. You can also help us a lot by subscribing to this channel, La Mishna TV, giving us a like, and sharing this video on your social media and messaging apps. Thank you very much. Also, you should know that on our website, lamishna.com, you will find all these classes, supporting materials, texts, articles, reports, and supplementary information for our free course on the Mishnah. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're continuing with our class. Now, imagine we enter the Talmud as if opening a door to a secret laboratory of the human mind. There, the sages don't sleep, but they study what happens when we do. And they discover something fascinating, that sleep is a mixed territory, a borderland where the divine and the psychological touch without completely mixing. The core is in Barakot 55a, 57b, the famous Talmudic dream book, and the first sentence that appears is almost a manifesto. Dreams follow interpretation. In other words, a dream is not a closed dictate. It is raw material. It is you, your mouth, your reading, your consciousness, who activates its meaning. That's why they add, an uninterpreted dream is like an unread letter. It has potential, but it remains dormant if you don't address it. Now the rabbis are realistic. They say the dream is a mixture. One part comes from above, but much comes from hirhurei lev, the murmurings of the heart, anxieties, desires, guilt, unresolved issues of the day. Not every dream is prophecy. Not every symbol is a message. Sometimes your mind is simply trying to sort out the mess of Thursday. Even so, the Talmud sees in the dream an ethical space. It affirms that the righteous are shown difficult dreams, so that they may reflect. The wicked are shown pleasant dreams, so that they remain asleep in their own illusion. It is a paradoxical pedagogy. The uncomfortable dream can be more of a blessing than the sweet fantasy. That is why they say that three things depend on special mercy: a good king, a good year, and a good dream. The dream, seen in this way, is a small nocturnal court where your soul reviews the day. The Talmud even offers a catalog of symbols: rivers, birds, pots, Hebrew letters, not as rigid astrology, but as a traditional language, a menu of associations for you to read your own inner story. And then comes the practical part. If a dream is deeply disturbing, there is the hatavat chalom, a small ritual to sweeten it. 3 people listen, respond with blessings, and symbolically transform it for the good. There is also the Ribono Shel Olam prayer, recited during the Amidah, asking for clarity and peace. The Talmud also speaks of fasting for a bad dream, the Tanit Chalom. It even allows doing so on Shabbat, if the distress is real, although it must then be compensated with another fast. It is less commonly practiced today, but the principle is clear. A dream can shake the soul so much that the person needs a concrete spiritual gesture to recover. Regarding vows made in dreams, the Shulchan Aruch states that they have no legal validity because there was no conscious intent. Even so, some recommend a hatarat nedarim, annulment of vows, in case the dream reflects an internal conflict that needs to be resolved. The dream does not obligate, but it can touch on issues that should be addressed. And here we come to the most important red line. Halacha, Jewish law, is not decided by dreams. Not even if a celestial sage with a fluorescent beard appears in them, dictating a ruling. The Torah was given to be interpreted while awake, with rules, debate, and responsibility. Maimonides, Rashba, Rosh, and many others repeat it. A dream can inspire, but it does not legislate. And this is the most beautiful thing about the rabbinic vision. The dream is a bridge, not a remote control. An intimate mirror where sometimes a spark appears, They say 1/60th of prophecy. But the decisive moment occurs when you wake up, when you take that nocturnal fragment and turn it into an ethical question, a sincere reflection, a movement of the soul. Because in the end, Judaism doesn't ask you to believe the dream, it asks you to grow from it. Imagine that we now enter the Kabbalah, that territory where sleep is not just a psychological phenomenon, nor even just a symbolic message, but an adventure of the soul. Kabbalah takes what the Talmud hints at and expands it upwards towards the spiritual worlds. It begins with a powerful idea. When we sleep, part of our neshama, soul, ascends. According to the Zohar, the soul gently separates from the body and ascends to more subtle planes. Like someone peering through a luminous window. There it can hear teachings, meet deceased tzaddikim, righteous people, receive warnings, consolations, or simple flashes of clarity. And the rule is simple and demanding. The more refined the person, the more truth their dreams contain. The dream, in this vision, is not a random visit. It is a mirror of the inner state. But even the Zohar insists on what we already suspect. Every dream mixes truth and falsehood. The luminous part comes from the elevated soul. The confusing part comes from the Sitra Achra, that other side that introduces noise, impulses, and shadows from the subconscious. So even for Kabbalah, the dream is not pure prophecy. It is raw material that requires purification, discernment, and humility. The Kabbalists also pay attention to the time of night. They say that dreams before midnight are more chaotic, more tinged with confusion. In contrast, dreams between midnight and dawn have a greater proportion of truth because that nocturnal period is spiritually aligned with mercy, clarity, and revelation. It's as if the night itself breathes at different frequencies. After the cessation of biblical prophecy, Kabbalah interprets many dreams as a kind of echo of prophecy. They are not prophets, but rather receivers of a whisper. From this arise accounts of Gilui Eliyahu, revelation of Elijah, of disciples who receive teachings from their masters while they sleep, or of souls that meet to transmit wisdom. It's not mandatory to believe every story literally, but they all point to the same thing. Sleep is a channel, an opportunity to hear what wakefulness sometimes obscures. That's why Kabbalah insists so much on preparing before going to sleep, saying the Kriyat Shema al Hamatah with intention, doing a Feshbon Hanafesh, a brief review of the day, and avoiding images or words that tarnish the heart. Because if the soul is going to ascend, it's better that it ascends lightly, clearly, and openly. The quality of sleep depends in part on the quality of the soul that goes to bed, and we arrive at contemporary thought. Today, many are trying to bridge the gap between mystical tradition and modern psychology. They say, dreams reveal hirhurei lev, deep desires and guilt, just as a therapist would explain. But that doesn't contradict the spiritual vision. On the contrary, the soul can use that same psychological language to express what it needs to heal. That's why writing down dreams, meditating on them, and relating them to Torah texts is seen as a form of personal avodah, spiritual work, not as divination, but as a quest. In the end, Kabbalah leaves us with a beautiful image. Sleep is a nocturnal journey where the soul gathers messages, some true, others distorted, and brings them back at dawn. The key isn't to sleep better, but to wake up better, with a heart a little cleaner, a little wiser, a little more attentive to the voice that is sometimes only heard when the world falls silent. Now, imagine that we open the Talmud's secret file, the keys to interpreting dreams. And I want you to hear this as if we were in class with that calm tone of curiosity, because the subject is deep, but it is not meant to scare anyone. We begin with the golden rule from Barakot 55 to 57. All dreams follow their interpretation. That is, the dream is raw material, and the mouth, your reading, your perspective, gives it form. That is why they also say, an uninterpreted dream is like an unread letter. The message is there, but it is not activated. And the key is this: interpretation does not only explain, it also modulates the emotional and spiritual impact of the dream. The sages add a second rule. Every dream contains a mix of truth and falsehood. One part comes from the soul. Another part comes from mental noise. So we never take a dream as a pure message. We know there is distortion, twisted symbols, and fragments of desires and guilt that slip in uninvited. And here appears one of the most famous accounts, the case of Bar Hedya. The rabbis Abaye and Rava told him the same dream, and depending on who paid him and who did not, he interpreted it for good or for evil. The Talmud takes this episode as a warning. The interpreter can steer the outcome. So if you are going to consult someone, let it be a wise, balanced person who truly wants your good, not a mercenary of the occult. Then comes the ethical dimension. The sages say that sometimes a righteous person is shown troubling dreams to push him toward introspection, and sometimes a wicked person is shown pleasant dreams so that he remains asleep in his illusion. So the point is not, will it come true, but rather, what is this asking of me as a human being? Now we move on to halakha. What should one do with an unsettling dream? The tradition proposes hatavat halom, literally sweetening the dream. The person stands before 3 friends who truly care for him, and they say, "You have seen a good dream," together with verses of blessing. We do not seek a detailed interpretation. We seek to transform the verdict and trust that good can replace fear. The Talmud also mentions ta'anit halom, a fast for a very disturbing dream. It is even allowed on Shabbat, although it must later be compensated for. Today, moderation is recommended before fasting. It is better to choose prayer, charity, study, and an honest conversation with oneself. The Shulchan Aruch adds another point. Vows made in dreams have no legal force, because conscious intention is lacking. Even so, some advise performing hatarat nedarim if the dream has touched a sensitive part of the soul, not because it obligates, but because it helps clarify and bring inner order. And here comes the absolute limit. Halakha is not decided by dreams. Not even if you see a heavenly sage glowing like mystical neon. The law is decided while awake, through study, debate, and responsibility. A dream may inspire, but it does not legislate. Now we enter the Kabbalistic dimension. For Kabbalah, the dream is a journey of the soul. One part of the neshama rises, while the other remains in the body. Depending on its level, it may encounter light or darkness, receive clarity or hear confusion. The Kabbalists say that the purer a person is, the higher the soul ascends, and the more truth it gathers. If it ascends to luminous realms, it sees clear images. If it enters murky areas, it receives chaos and deception. That is why Kabbalah insists on preparation before sleep, reciting the Shema with intention, making a brief moral self-examination, and being careful about the images we allow into the mind. The best interpretation of a dream begins before closing one's eyes. And finally, a small practical protocol, a map for any dreamer. First, record the dream as soon as you wake up, including the main emotion. Second, check its source. Is it psychological? Ethical? Does it contradict the Torah? If it contradicts it, discard it. Third, interpret it within the Torah, seeking growth, not superstition. Fourth, if there is anxiety, use prayer, hatavat halom, charity, and study to realign the soul. And fifth, keep clear boundaries. Do not make drastic decisions or change halakha because of a dream. In summary, Judaism does not ask you to obey your dreams. It asks you to grow through them. A dream does not dictate your destiny, but it can illuminate your path if you awaken with an attentive heart. That is all for today's class. Until the next video.